So we are live. Welcome to the Greatness Engineering Hour show. Today we have a special shows, part of our series on domestic violence and the violence against women. And today I have three experts. Actually, one of them will join us later. I have Dr. Paper. They're all in the US, and Dr. April with me. And as you know, domestic violence it's a key issue, and some of the statistics are really worrying. And we can see in some countries, for example, in Australia, when 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience, severe physical violence by people that they know, intimate people in their lifetime, and 1 in 10 women in the United States will be raped, by an intimate partner, or so it's really happening near to us, and we need to find a way to address it, find a way to find strategies that are going to help us to try to solve this problem, because we're losing life as a result of this, and we really need to start to address it properly. And we all know somebody who've been in domestic violence, and we have the opportunity to do something. We can't just stay silent anymore. And that's why I started this series. Last month I had Claudia from South Africa, and she's she showed us what they are doing there to address what's going on, because it has gone to another level in South Africa, with women losing their life every single day. So that's really important that we start to look at it. So let's not wait, and really start the conversation with our free expert, and really get to educate ourselves, but also get to have the tools and the strategy to take action in our own environment, and really have an impact, a positive impact, to stop this, because I call it a pandemic, to stop this pandemic that are actually killing a lot of women all over the world.
Stop killing us! Stop raping us! Stop molesting us! Stop killing us! Stop killing us!
Tens of thousands of people have marched through the capital Lima and across Peru to condemn violence against women. The Ni Uno Menos, or Not One Less movement grew after 2 high-profile cases swept social media. Arlette Contreras here being attacked by her partner Adriano Pozo. He was fined and a light prison sentence suspended.
It's very difficult to live with those memories, that ugly experience, knowing that he could have killed me, that I was in the hands of someone who said he wanted me, a person who...
Every 2 days, a woman in France is murdered. Most of them are killed by their partners or former partners. About 1/3 when they decide to separate.
So welcome to the Greatness Engineering Hour show. Dr. April and Dr. Paper, and really, a warm welcome to talk about a very important subject and something that, an issue that are actually touching, I think, millions of people around the world, and we really need to address it. I mean, some women are losing their life, like we could see in this video, and it's about time for us to really have the debate and get the advice from experts to help us take action in our communities, in our environment. So to start the conversation, just want to ask you to introduce yourself to the audience and let us know a little bit about, how did you get to, focus on this issue, and, tell us, the key areas, and the key point in your stories that, that are actually been defining what you're doing right now. So I'll start with you, Dr. April, just if you can start and introduce yourself.
Well, I want to say hello to everyone, and certainly to Muriel. Thank you so very much for the invitation to participate in this important conversation. I am an ordained minister here in the United States, specifically here in metropolitan Detroit, Michigan, and my doctorate. My Doctor of Ministry degree, for that project, I focused on domestic abuse in Christian homes because as I was growing up, I grew up in a home where we went to church, we were active in our church, and yet there was domestic abuse in our home. And growing up as a child, you are taught what happens in the home stays in the home, and so it caused me to compartmentalize my relationship with God, my relationship with friends and family, and then my relationship inside of our home. Because there were certain conversations that I could not have. I did not feel safe having those conversations, and I knew better than to tell anyone what was happening inside of our home. And so when it was time for me to focus on a topic for my doctoral study, my mind was already focused on domestic abuse in Christian homes because I knew from my experience as ordained clergy that my family was not the first and we were not the last. I was still, as a full-time part of the pastoral staff here at my church, I was still encountering women who were being abused. I'll never forget the day a woman came in on a Sunday morning in the rain with her leg was in a cast and she had it wrapped up with plastic bags. And she was sitting in the lobby. There's sort of like a pathway between buildings at our church. And she was sitting there and multitudes of people kept walking past her. And I sat down next to her and asked her if I could help her. And the woman breaks into tears and begins to explain to me that her arm was already in a sling. Her boyfriend had beat her that morning, and he had broken her arm, and he had broken her leg.
Wow.
And she walked to the church in the rain. And that was just one of several encounters I had with women who sought refuge at the church. They were in abusive relationships. So when it was time for me to conduct the study, I was focused on abuse in Christian homes because it happened to me. It happened in our household, and it was still happening amongst the Christian community. And the very idea that that woman sat in our lobby in between worship services, and I'm the only person who approached her. Those are the things that haunt me because I think about all of the women who did not come to the church, whose stories are like hers, if not worse. And so my background or my ability to address the issue is personal. As a result of the abuse in our home, I became a good liar because you learn to lie when you're told not to talk about certain things, or you know better than to talk about certain things. You become a good liar. I suffered from anxiety, emotional problems. I had a violent temper that I still have to keep under control because my first impulse is to hit something or to break something. That spirit is still lingering because of the environment in which I grew up. And so I'm delighted to have this conversation. It is a secret that we don't talk about in the open, and it's far time that we pull the covers off of it. If it's true that we are concerned about people of color, then we certainly need to be concerned about women who are marginalized, and even more so in the Christian community. They are taught to be the lesser vessel. That ideology creates the perfect storm for women to be abused and beaten by everyone from the man who's an usher to the man who's a pastor.
Wow. So
And
that's
that's the conversation.
and that's very important. I mean, it's the same here. It doesn't have to be just the Black community.
Right.
Here, it's happening, and it's growing. Those numbers are growing. Women being killed every
Yes.
single day by
Yes.
their partners or by anybody in their family. It's just becoming, like I said, a pandemic, and we need to start to talk about it, to address and to empower
Yes.
women,
Yes.
so
Yes.
that they know how to how to react and where to go if something like that happen. So we
Yes.
have quite a lot of people. Let's just have a break before we go to Dr. Paper. So we have Lotus. Lotus is tuning in from Washington, and we have Stephanie. Stephanie is here as well. We have Sean. Sean is also working on domestic violence. She's a survivor herself. So she's in Florida, and Angela as well. Princess is from South Africa. And we have Charmaine. Charmaine has been on my show talking about her own experience being raped repetitively and abused by her family members. So it's been actually quite confronting, this episode with Charmaine. And yes, so I talked about Sean as well, over 10 years of domestic violence. So a lot of wounded women who have been, trying to get out of it in their head, because, it's happening. Sometimes you think when it stopped, that's the end, but there's some, it's still there, and it
Yes.
still needs to be addressed. So that's very important.
Yes.
So, I mean, Dr. Paper, so let us know, who you are, and what is your experience, and really, the key thing in your life that led you to focus your work on domestic violence.
Well, first of all, greetings to all of you. Thank you, Marielle, for having me. Good day, Dr. April. It's such a pleasure to be here with both of you. And again, thank you to everyone who was listening. This is so dear to my heart, for so many reasons that Dr. April has already touched on, and that you already touched on, even in the intro with the documentary that was shown at the beginning of the show. And what's amazing is that we are in 3 different sections on the planet, 2 different continents. April being in Detroit, I'm in New York, and yet, despite the distance, despite the distinct differences in our geographic locations, we share such a horrific experience in common, whether we are personal victims or we know someone.
Yes.
And so that in and of itself is reason to have a show like this and to continue. So kudos to you. May God bless you and keep you in your work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, so I have, in addition to Dr. April, I am a senior pastor of the Destiny House Christian Center. And as a senior leader, the focus of my particular church is to really um, use biblical principles and the word of the Lord to develop destiny within people. We certainly, in studying specifically the New Testament, we learn that not only does God love us, but God has gifted all of us with something very specific. And he has a divine plan that's attached to our life. giving us not just the physical DNA, but also a spiritual DNA. However, because we are also in the flesh, it is up to us to do the work, to discover, to fulfill, and to eventually be very deliberate about fulfilling whatever it is our divine purpose. So, how does that look in everyday life when we often have to deal with just the things that life brings to us that's common to most people? Work, family, a career, but then we have internal issues. And when life that is challenging in and of itself without any interruption, how does it look when one is endeavoring to fulfill their destiny when they have been traumatized? When they have been traumatized, specifically, we are focusing on domestic violence. Within domestic violence, there are so many different factors. So obviously, DV covers an array of various abuses. When someone is encountering domestic violence, we know that the primary concern is to get that person to safety. Where my particular expertise comes in is within that group. These people are often suffering from other forms of abuse. Much of that includes rape. When you're speaking specifically with domestic violence victims, the other associated abuses do not often get addressed for obvious reasons. The priority is safety. But after you get the person safe, how do you now deal with the sub traumas? Or because domestic violence is often representative of a complex trauma where it involves other traumatic events that have taken place in that person's life. And usually, as a pastor, at least with the work that I have done outside of my ministry, I have encountered that oftentimes in the life of the victim, they had pre-existing conditions that set them up to even be attracted to spouses that would be a perpetrator in their life. And so oftentimes when providing someone advice or counsel in the role of a pastor, if you as a spiritual leader then have what we call is a deliverance ministry, and you're dealing with the spiritual aspect of what is the underlying factor and how to do it without blaming the victim. Why were you attracted often has to also be discussed. That leads to now a person oftentimes risking unleashing and tapping into additional triggers because you have to now walk them back in history to open wounds that they desperately have tried to close. But we know physically when we close wounds that have never been properly treated, they're just really scabs. In order to really get healed, you have to clean the wound out. And so this is what deliverance does. And so now being skilled in deliverance to address these particular issues, with the end result being that the individual becomes now free enough to live their best life, fulfilling their divine destiny. And that is really what our ministry is about. In addition, I have an organization that I started prior to becoming a pastor because I was encountering so many women in the church, but in my case also who were not necessarily in the church, so to speak. But I had this, I would say, inclination, and now I know that it was just God leading me to women who were outwardly very successful, leaders in their careers. But when it came to things that would be considered intimate and private, were having tremendous struggles. Subsequently, it led me to develop an organization called W.I.F.E, which is an acronym that stands for Women Intended for Excellence. And we coined the phrase, we deal with persons that are public successes and private messes. And I targeted people who suffered the residue of being raped. And then oftentimes I would find that these great women, crafty, intelligent, skilled, didn't have any addictions, which we would associate as the quote unquote normal problems. These women looked great, but yet they were trapped emotionally, socially, and psychologically in hellish situations. And so, in dealing with collaborating with people to get them the help if domestic violence was present, but then simultaneously working with them to rebuild their self-esteem, to help them to get their power back so that they can now experience the same levels of success internally and in their private existence and have a real true relationship with God eventually that wasn't contaminated by their human experience. I myself was one of those women who, as a child, I was a victim.
And that's a key thing, you know.
Yes. And so I had
Go
a
ahead,
personal
yeah.
connection, correct, to it, being a victim of sexual abuse as a child, not telling anyone until I became an adult. And it didn't happen by the people who my mom had warned me about. It was from someone who was intimate, and it was the one person she trusted.
Wow.
And so growing up with that, it unleashed and gave access to other events that took place in my life. And so when you are raped at a young age is even more traumatic. But I began to encounter some of the residue that I was seeing, and it was very, I would say, discreet and hard to detect because publicly I was educated, I was successful, I was ambitious. But then sometimes I felt that I was trying to really overachieve. And when I began to deal with it, why is it that I have all of these degrees and I have all of these accomplishments and I never felt satisfied and whole? And that forced me, compelled me to begin to deal with the inward pain. And I began to become, I would say, a benefactor of my own organization. And from a spiritual perspective, and as a preacher and now a pastor, God oftentimes uses us to now have to benefit from what we preach and teach, so that it's not, whenever we minister, is not void of human connection. And it makes it more potent and powerful. And subsequently, I have now my organization and my church that I oversee, where this particular culture has been built to embrace now not just the women, but also the men that have also been victimized, to have a safe place to worship and to get healed. And sometimes it happens at the same time.
And that's very important. And one point that, you know, I agree with you, because I remember this experience. I was sharing an office with a lady, and I worked in a male-dominated environment in oil and gas. But this lady was so dominant in the office. But yet, you know, we find out that she was going through domestic violence, and you couldn't actually know because she was so, you know, authoritarian at in the office, and she was running this office like, you know, with strong hands, and we couldn't actually think of her being abused by a man in a house. And that's why it's very important to understand, you know, how can we identify that and how can we help? And I think that's sometimes the problem that we have as somebody exterior from, you know, from the outside, to know, okay, what is happening, because the person is so strong and not showing any emotion that you can't actually guess that, you know, that's what's happening in a domestic environment, and that's very difficult. So let's have just a break in the comment box, because it's actually crazy right now, and I'll go to Dr. April. So we have Princess from South Africa. This is a topic that I honestly don't know how it can be stopped anymore as it continue. But I thank God for this platform, as it is focusing on God's word and, and regards to what God say about women and children. So yeah, I mean, it's like Dr. Pepper was saying, there's a big spiritual part into it. And we need to take this into account. So yes, Dr. Celina unfortunately couldn't connect. She should have been here, but she's supporting, so no problem. And then there's Sean herself, survivor. I can only say I would have never thought I would have been in DV. I agree with Dr. Martin. A Deliverance Ministry is needed on all levels when it comes to church. Yeah. And I saw that Charmaine as well. Charmaine, so true. I've seen it, and I have been there, abused, raped, and molested as a child. That led me to be attracted to the same kind of abusive personality, until I learned from God how to truly have a healthy relationship. Yeah. And my question to you, Dr. April, is that, is it, a kind of generational curse that, this thing is carrying? Or what's the spiritual, reason and the spiritual impact that, this domestic violence has into a family? Because I remember from, Charmaine case, it was just something that was happening. It happens to a mom, it happened to her, and then everybody was quiet. And, from the outside, nobody knew that it was happening in a family. And so how do we handle that? And
well, one of the key factors in abuse being able to be so pervasive in our families is silence. The first part is denial. The second part is silence. And so, not to offend anyone, but oftentimes what we have labeled as generational curses are simply generational habits, bad habits that have been passed on from one generation to the next. It's because we tend not to have candid conversations within our families. There are certain things that we don't discuss. And I've spoken with Dr. Pepper about this before. There is a level of abuse that is acceptable in a Christian home. Children can be chastised and beaten. And some families, I don't know how it is over there in Australia or in Africa, but in the U.S., there's a phrase that many people believe is biblical, but it is not, that says, spare the rod, spoil the child. That is not in the Bible. That scripture has been twisted, but it gives parents the permission to beat the children or to chastise the children using their hands or switches or belts, and some parents use shoes or whatever they can get their hands on. But my point being, we pass on these generational themes. So if violence is a theme within the family, if abuse has taken place with the grandmother and the grandfather, and then it happens in the next generation because the next generation has seen it. There are even times whereas a person has experienced one part of violence, physical, and they'll say, well, I never want to experience that. Well, they'll go into another relationship, or they go into adult relationships and they experience other types of abuse, and they don't label it abuse because it wasn't that. It wasn't someone hitting them. So they may be involved in emotional and psychological traumatic experiences. It may be spiritual abuse, where they marry someone who may not be as devoted to religion as they are. And this person says, I don't want to hear anything about your God. Don't tell me anything about your church. And they don't view that as abuse. Sometimes with abuse, we only look for one indicator. We simply the physical aspect. And if the physical aspect is not there, then we don't label it abuse. It can be psychological abuse. It could be technological abuse. They're tracking you on your phone. They're harassing you via social media. And it is allowed to hide one generation to the next because no one wants to say anything. No one wants to address it. I conducted a conversation with my family. I actually used them as a part of my study as my focus group. And I conducted a 1 hour, maybe an hour and a half workshop with my family the day after Christmas on my mom's side, my maternal family. And there were people in the room who we knew were in abusive relationships. After the presentation, my family went on for another 2 hours talking about abuse. That was the first time abuse had ever been discussed in my family. Abuse has to be, that monster of abuse has to be made uncomfortable in our families. That is the way that that curse is broken. When you address that spirit face to face, when it's spoken of, when you have conversations with the young men in your family, the young women in your family, to say this behavior is not acceptable, that is not acceptable. When the victim is willing to have those conversations, or at least the family is willing to have those conversations, that is the only way that spirit can be broken. As long as there is silence and denial, abuse is allowed to continue to live among us. It sits down at the dinner table with us. It sits with us around the Christmas tree. It gathers with us at Thanksgiving. We allow that monster to come into our midst, and no one wants to say anything. No one wants to. I refuse to believe that no one in my mother's family knew that she was being abused. I refuse to believe that, because there was an incident that I remember that happened at one of my aunt's homes when I was maybe an early adolescent. I remember an incident happening, and I remember my aunt asking my father to leave the house. So there was knowledge of it, but you also have to take a look at whether or not the victim is even ready to address it, or ready to leave, or ready to have that conversation, because you have to deal with shame. You have to deal with fear. And then the mentality of people who believe once you're in a relationship, or heaven forbid, once you're in a marriage, you have to stay in that marriage till death do you part. They have in their minds, I must stay for better or for worse. In their mind, I must stay for better or for worse. And so that worst part, it gives abuse the opportunity to exist without confrontation. And so what I say is that abuse must be confronted. You must have these dangerously brave conversations, because if it were cancer, this is the example I use. If it were cancer, then the family would rally around the cancer patient. The family would make sure the cancer patient had transportation to and from the doctor. You would go with the cancer patient to treatment. The family would rally around someone who has cancer. Why are we willing to do that to address cancer and disease, but we won't do it to address the disease of abuse? It must be confronted.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? That's the challenge, is really how do we view it, and how do you, and what can we do, to change things? And I talk about, coming from a background, an African background, where those things are not, you're not even allowed to mention them, because it's the family things, and then you have such a hierarchical, structure in the family, that they are things that you're not allowed to bring when you are a child, and or when you are a woman. So how do we break that? What are the tools? What are the strategies that we can start to implement, not only for for victims, but also for perpetrators, because they need help. Because they are.
The first thing I suggest is that we create safe spaces.
Actually sick, So what can we do?
That we create safe spaces. We must create safe spaces for women and children and men, because there are men who are being abused, and they say nothing because they are ridiculed. Can you imagine a man going and telling his friends that his wife is abusive? They would laugh in his face. They would make fun of him. They would call him a sissy or a punk. How can you let this woman abuse? What do you mean she's abusing you? You're taller than her. You're stronger than her. What do you mean she's abusing you? We must create safe spaces for victims, safe spaces for children, and we must provide advocacy for perpetrators to find healing and restoration, because they're often ostracized and they're pushed out there to try and deal with whatever their anger issues are. And sometimes these are men and women, the perpetrators are men and women who've also witnessed abuse or have been abused. And so they weren't able to control things in their lifetime. I had some uncomfortable conversations with my father about his upbringing and things that happened to him as a child. And I found out that my dad wasn't allowed to go to school because he was the oldest. He had to go to work. He wasn't allowed to finish school. There were many things in my dad's life that he had no control over. So what do you do when you're young and you are stripped of being able to decide or even have control over your life and things pertaining to your life? What do you do? Then go out into the world and you control everything with an iron fist. And so we must provide safe spaces, even for perpetrators, to talk about those issues that brought them to this place and how they found healing and how they found restoration, and then help them to not do what I call change the dial on their abuse. So they come of age and they realize hitting people is wrong, but you're still verbally and emotionally abusive. So they change the dial on it. And since they're no longer putting their hands on people, they no longer see themselves as being abusive. We have to have extensive conversations with people who actually are trained. And one thing that I found is that a lot of clergy are not trained as to how these issues must be addressed. And so rather than outsource the situation, they'll try and fix it just by throwing scripture at it and throwing prayers at it. And this is a serious matter that requires expertise.
Exactly. And sometimes we miss out, especially when we think that, everything should be dealt by, by God. We tend to sit down, forgetting that we have to do our part as well. It's yes, God is here, is watching over us, is guiding us, but we need to do our part and start to, take action and put sensible thing to address the problem. And that's why I really want to ask, we are there. It looks like the problem is getting worse instead of, so how do we, how do we stop that? Because what are the tools as an expert that you think, not only for women who actually manage to, get themselves out of this environment, what is available, and what are the, the key thing that for us outside this, this world we can do, or how can we identify, what's going on and what can we do to help them to to save them, because it's, like you said, it's a safety issue. At the end of the day, it's a matter of, life or death.
It is.
And you have to face it every single day.
Yes. Dr. Pepper, you want to
go for?
Well, I was enjoying Dr. Hearn.
Now we're going to enjoy you.
That's my girl anyway. I would just say amen to everything she said. What I liked most about and what she said was the part that I focused in on was we need to create a culture for restoration and healing. I thought that was a very prolific statement that she said, right? Because we really can't control as children and even young people who we are born from, what family we hail from. We have no control over that. But we do have control over what we do with our past experiences. And so she eloquently talked about generational curses, they end up spiritually becoming curses. But why? Because they are generational habits and behaviors that went undealt with.
Mhm.
And then when people don't have the strategies to unravel from them, we live out the curse.
Yes.
And it turns into a spiritual bondage.
Yes, it does.
And now we need spiritual entities to destroy it.
Yes.
So for the culture of restoration and healing, I would like to add one additional component to now answer your question, Marielle. How do we move forward? While I do support and agree and believe and am very deliberate about creating that kind of culture in my organization as well as in my church, I also, as a leader, specifically a spiritual leader, you still have to hold everybody accountable, even the victim,
Yes.
particularly when they are of an adult age. Now, how it looks is very different. Of course, it needs to be loving, it needs to be tender, but you need to be consistent. And we need to also understand that after someone is brutally victimized, not all people embrace the healing process.
Correct. Correct.
Because some of them have opted to just continue to live in bondage because it's easier.
Yes.
The
Yes.
scripture says, James, in the book of James 22 and 20, the summation of the scripture is faith without works is dead.
Yes.
And so what you were talking about, Marielle, is that God provides the structure for us to get healing, but he leaves it up to us to make the choice to go all the way in and to really deal with the depth of our issue, the width of our issue, so that we can experience the height of God and the height of who he intended us to be.
Yes.
Which now, when it comes to destiny fulfillment, to achieve your divine destiny requires work.
Yes.
And while not all people require the intense emotional rebuilding, because not everybody has had that kind of trauma, but for those who do, they too must be held accountable for their own future. We get comfortable specifically within the church arena to be stuck in understanding God as Alpha and the spiritual feeling that we get. It emulates an addiction.
Yeah,
Where
indeed.
we use church as a crutch, it's
Indeed.
like crack.
Indeed.
And we get the spiritual high of the emotional experience, which is a good experience, which is what I love. I'm sure April loves and many of your viewers love. But that's not all that God intended us to experience.
Indeed.
It's like going to a gas station to get filled up, but you don't stay parked with your vehicle at the gas station. You go to the gas station to get gas so that you can get to your destination.
Right.
And so many people don't want to drive their own vehicle to their destination. And because they have grown accustomed to being told and they believe that they are a victim for life.
Yes.
So how do we transpose people to change their mindset from a victim to a victor?
Right.
Well, first, you as the mentor, the leader, the counselor, in our cases, we are both ministers. We need to also do some fact finding. So you give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes we need to find out how serious is this person? Are they ready to get out?
Right.
Will we be doing more harm because we are so frustrated by their circumstances? This is something that I had to learn. I had to learn in working with a lot of victims. And I found myself to be really transparent I had gotten a lot of healing, but then I thought everybody wanted to be free. And I found myself pushing people more than what they wanted. And I ended up in a whole abyss of frustration
Yes. Yes.
because the person really wasn't pushing for themselves.
Right.
And they were enjoying me doing the work for them.
Yes.
And then I began to now become introspective in my own life. Where did I get that from? And a lot of that was from my own family dynamic, because there's a lot of codependency
Yes.
in my own family. And I, like April said, if you don't see this type of abuse, you don't think that it is. I, in my first marriage, was financially abused. I had no wounds. I was never hit. But I suffered where my husband at the time stole my identity. And here I was, a school administrator, in unraveling from him, but my whole check was being garnished to pay for expenses that I never approved, never knew was open, because this man thought that it was okay for him to take my social security number and open all kinds of business loans, because he was the entrepreneur and I had given the message that I would just do whatever I needed to do to support him in his venture. But that did not mean that I was okay with him taking out all these loans to buy product for his business. Then he turns around and dumps me and leaves me in over $500,000 in debt.
Wow.
So when I'm trying to now get assistance, particularly here I am in the pulpit, here I am at the time an ordained elder, and my ministry was taken off. I found myself in a very strange place, because I didn't look like a victim. I didn't sound like a victim.
Right.
I was able to function, which
Right.
is often not attributed to what victims look and sound like.
Right.
So it was difficult to sell my story as a victim of abuse, because I was anti-victim. And I would get things from women like, you need to be good. Your husband is fine, which he was, but he was a thief and a liar. And he had a collar. And he was a dynamic preacher with an effervescent personality. I did not know there was such thing as financial abuse, so I couldn't even identify what I was talking about. And yes, Charmaine, you are correct. Not everyone wants to be saved or independent. I totally agree. And so it was years later, throughout the process of now unraveling from this marriage and the intricacies that I had been entangled in emotionally, sending the message that this was okay. It was not okay. And now to gain my power back, because I'm the woman, I became the B word.
Yeah. Right.
Whereas if it were the man,
Right.
he would have been accepted for putting me in my place.
Yeah.
It is never okay for anybody to take somebody's identity
Yes.
under any circumstances without their permission.
That's
There
right.
were loans that I never co-signed, that he forged my signature, him and his partner. And so after the divorce, these things lingered as a residue, and the court system was against me because we were married. And some of the signatures were so good, I couldn't even prove that it was not my signature.
Wow.
And it would have taken me more time and effort to continue to be attached to him. The sum of it I had to pay off, and just to get free. And I had to make a decision. Do I constantly fight and scream, you owe me money? Or do I take that energy and time, that precious time, to unravel?
Right.
I chose to unravel.
Right.
But I would never judge anybody if they had chosen the other path.
Yeah.
Because for me, I needed peace.
Right.
And so now I'm here on this platform to tell the story that there are multiple ways to get to victory.
Yeah.
But for both the person who is aspiring victory, they have to want it. And I just want to warn those, whether you are a counselor by trade, a counselor in a church, a pastor, a minister, a member of the ecclesia, and whatever your title is, you also need to take time to do some fact finding. Give a person an ample window to prove that they want to implement the advice that you are providing.
Yes.
Because if they don't, you are literally casting your pearls among swine. And you may need to unravel from the relationship, not that you are abandoning the person, but they simply may not be ready for complete victory.
Yes.
And you have to accept it without having animosity against the person that you are trying to help.
Yes.
Because that is another symptom of the person's abuse.
Yes.
So holding everybody accountable for their actions is good for the victim, but it's also good for the person rendering the advice and helping to establish a safe culture. Otherwise, you continue to become a co-conspirator to their codependency. And as a woman of God, we who've been through it, we cannot allow anyone, no matter how sorry we feel for them, no matter how much we grow to love them, to throw us off course and to cause us to go back into, I would say, a connection that is not godly. And if we do, we're not really aspiring to what God wants.
Right.
And we are not helping the individual to learn their own path.
Yes.
We have to coach sometimes in pieces. And sometimes we plant the seed, somebody else comes along and waters it, and then only God can give the increase.
Amen.
I want to add that what Dr. Pepper was sharing, because some people aren't ready to make the complete disconnect between them and their perpetrator, because their lives have become so enmeshed. So the victim, be it male or female, they believe somewhere in their spirits that to be apart from them is too painful for both parties. They believe that they can somehow change this individual, especially if they're a person of deep faith. They believe that their prayers can change this individual, a sermon can change this individual, going around the house touching everything with blessed oil will change this individual. You have to prepare yourself, because the statistic is that a person may leave 7 times.
That's right.
Before they decide to leave for good. And so we can't be angry with them when they go back, because many go back. Our prayer is, Lord, allow them that 7th time.
Correct.
Don't let this cost them their lives. I talked a couple weeks ago with a parent whose child is now 21. She's been in this relationship with this young man since she was, I believe, 17, 18. He's been in and out of jail. He was first controlling. It was cute when he was telling her what to wear and where to go, things of that nature. Most recently, he has put his hands on her, and so she left him round about December or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, January. And she, of course, called her parents, and her father went to get her, and she came home with the parent, and it gave the perpetrator just enough time to talk her into coming back. And she went back. And, her mom is very heartbroken, and she said, well, I just can't talk to her, Reverend April. I don't know what to do. And I said to her, if you just call her once a day to tell her that you love her, don't talk about him. Don't focus on him. Don't talk about the relationship with him. Call her or text her once a day just to tell her you love her. Make sure she's eating, make sure she's okay. I said, because love has a way of finding a way through the darkness, so that when she's ready to leave, she'll know she can come back home. Because as long as the family is silent, you're buying into the story that he's selling, that nobody loves you but me.
Right.
Nobody cares about you. Right. Even your parents don't want to talk to you. So as long as families are silent, when someone is in an abusive relationship, you are giving a narrative that supports the story that they're being told, that no one's going to love them like this individual. As long as you continue to reach out in love, the prayer is eventually love will tap in to that dark place to help them find their way back home. So that's one suggestion I would give to families, because just to run in and pack somebody up and tell them you got to get out of here, that doesn't work, because they've been convinced that this is a loving relationship, regardless of what it looks like on the outside. They've been convinced that this is a loving relationship, and truth be told, they believe this is love. They love their perpetrator. They believe this is love. And our job as the people on the outside is to show him or her that love is unconditional.
Correct.
Love does not hurt.
That's right.
Love does not wound, so that when it's time for them to really disconnect, they can find their way back to safety.
May I also add just one thing, Miriam? Do we have time?
Yeah, just go ahead. We have time. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I also want to say that was so poignant. Love also does not oppress.
Right.
And it does not create babies for life.
Right.
And so I've seen so many parents create an atmosphere for their children, not all, but a lot. Sometimes we jokingly in the counseling, because I'm also an educator in a high school, which you two ladies know. And so another role that we have is school counselors. And among school counselors, there's the joke of the parent who's hovering over their children who's getting ready to go to college. They call them helicopter parents.
Right.
But there is some truth to the pain of being a helicopter parent. I'm not saying helicopter parents are abusive, but when it is over the top and it is done in excess, we sometimes establish an environment for our children to be in adult relationships where they become victims of a form of oppression that sometimes shows up as domestic violence or some form of abuse, because we have not prepared them as adults to be able to make sound decisions.
Right.
And we say stuff, well, you will always be my baby. That's fine, privately to a degree, but we are not raising children. We are raising future adults to become contributors to society. So our job as parents, regardless whether we're biological, adopted, foster parents, spiritual parents, is to show them the way in a loving and a safe environment, so that if they encounter someone who could be a threat to their existence, that they are skilled enough, empowered enough, and strong enough to make the decisions that if they can avoid the relationship, fine. But if they get in it, they now have a clear point of discernment and what to do to get out and to stay out. And I have found that many of these victims, there's another layer that goes along with the actual emotional residue, and that is the rebuilding of a person's self-esteem.
Exactly.
And that person's self-esteem is so shattered that if we don't catch them in time, they go on thinking they could never be repaired. They're not worthy. And you become the victim of their anger. And you're telling them things to love on them, teaching them how to make decisions for themselves, how to live as an adult. But they have made up in their emotional mind, they want to be kids forever.
Right.
Exactly.
Because it was less painful back then. They're 40 and 30, 40 and 50, and they're extremely emotionally immature. And as a pastor, I get these people coming to me, and they want me, because the adage of a pastor is to be so loving and tender. But no. My job is to get you where you are supposed to be in God.
Right.
And Paul said, when I was a child, I spake as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. I'm going to help you, and maybe I need to start in the playpen with you.
Yeah.
But I'm not staying in the playpen with you, even if you are victimized, because I'm healed.
Right.
My job is to show you what healing looks like and to give you strategies and to kind of layer and scaffold how to get you to become a spiritual adult,
Yeah.
an emotional adult, a psychological adult, so that you can make credible decisions and fly on your own. Because many churches have environments where the senior leaders enjoy having people that enjoy being oppressed,
Yes.
because it leads them to control everything. And now
Exactly.
there's no questioning, there's no challenge. And to me, that is not healthy. And so when you have a healthy church, you have a healthy family, it is a discourse of people coming up with adult decisions in a healthy way, where it may involve some disagreement at times, but it doesn't have anything to do with not loving them.
Right.
And love looks sometimes completely different than what these people have encountered.
Right.
And sometimes the person doing the coaching has to run the risk of maybe standing their ground and hoping that the person will come around. Because being a grown up is not just chronology.
Right.
It involves emotional chronology. And your job as the leader is to help to foster that. And then if the person continues to reject it, you might have to let them go their way until then.
Wow, so powerful. And let's just have a break to see what people, are saying here in comments. So we have, obviously, your chairman, both you ladies are so true. It took me years to truly break free from my family because I love them. And people told me for years to break free from my family. It is my family, but they were toxic, and I had to learn to be happy with me and God. So, just, illustrating what you were saying is that sometimes it's just so difficult to break from those abusive people, especially when they are your family. And so this is Cheryl. Silence is another shackle that needs to be broken and not held on. And then those shackles are too heavy to continue to carry on. So you need to take action. We have Princess as well from South Africa. We need to empower each of us as women and also reach out to those women in place of darkness. And I think that's important to have. But like it was mentioned, they have to be ready as well, because there's nothing you can do if they're not ready. Don't stay for the sake of children. You don't have to raise violent or oppressive children.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of the excuses that actually keep women into abusive relationship. And sometimes we just have to take those very hard decision. So you are right. There are many layers to these victims, and we need to understand those layers and get all the information before, as counselor, that we get involved. Okay, so then another one from Cheryl. Don't fake the love, mean that you say not what you think, want to hear from the parents. This hurt what we live with is very affecting in the future, and we need pure love. That is true. So yes, so a lot of comments, and a lot that we've learned from today. And so it's actually quite it's very emotional, and it's also very it's a very deep issue, because it involves a lot of emotion, and sometimes it's difficult as a counselor to get this emotional part, to be able to be neutral and really help the victims, and sometimes the perpetrator. And that's, I think, the challenge that most of you must be going through, because at the end of the day, you are human beings, and you have those emotions coming in, and they can actually interfere into the process that you're using all the strategies that you want to put in place. So I mean, we're getting to the end, and I think we're gonna have to have a part 2 or part 3 on this, because it's just it's just a lot of information that we need to put in here. So I just want to ask you before we leave, what do you think is key? Like I said, those numbers are keep growing. So what do you need? It's key for us to do and to focus on, as maybe just the first step or second step, whatever it is important for us, so that we can have this small, impact, and seeing those numbers go down in a way, because it's quite tragic, and especially with the pandemic right now, a lot of the victims are being locked down with their abusers, and it becomes very difficult to address the problem. So what do you think, I mean, the audience must be, left with before we leave this platform?
At the grassroots level, at the minimum, we have to create safe spaces for women and children to be able to ask for help. On the larger scale, we have to rally for laws to be put in place to protect victims and protect children from abuse. Here in the States and in many parts of the United States, the laws are so fluid when it comes to abuse or getting orders of protection. You may be protected, let's say in Michigan, but if you move to California, the order of protection doesn't follow you. You have to have your papers on you at all times. The person can still show up at the job or the grocery store where you go. You're not protected in the grocery store. You're only protected at your home. The laws have so many loopholes. At the minimum, create safe spaces for women and children. There aren't enough organizations. There aren't enough safe houses for women and children who are victims of abuse. There aren't enough organizations that provide counseling and support groups for perpetrators so that they can get the help that they need, because many of them are lashing out because they too have been abused in some way, shape, or fashion. There needs to be discussions within our church, just as well as we have premarital counseling. We need to add abuse portion within the premarital counseling, in our singles ministries, in our married couples ministries, in our youth departments, and our youth ministries to the young people. We have to have conversations because abuse happens at every level, as young as middle school. That's they get into these little relationships on the playground. You got little boys slapping around little girls on the playground. We have to be, if we're going to protect ourselves and have a zero tolerance policy against abuse, then it needs to go across the board. We need to break the silence and start having these conversations. One thing that I found is that this is a conversation that people want to have, but they are afraid to have it, and they don't even know where to begin.
Exactly. And that's how I felt, is that, I saw this happening. I've not been in an abusive relationship myself, but I've seen so many women, being, needed help, but not saying it. And it's really heartbreaking to see that they're suffering.
Look for all of the signs. If they're harassing you on social media, that's electronic abuse. If they're talking down about your faith, that's spiritual abuse. If they're programming you to think that it wasn't abuse when it was, that's gaslighting. That's a form of abuse. That's like slapping me and telling me that you didn't slap me, or making it my fault that I got slapped. Well, you have a smart mouth, and so that's why I slapped you. So the abused, the victim survivor, as they're called, the victim survivor then believes that they in some way deserve the treatment that they're getting.
Exactly.
Brainwashed. I share with Dr. Pepper, and then I'm going to be quiet. We have to reteach the Genesis narrative of creation.
That's correct.
Because
yes.
God created man and woman, he gave both of them dominion over everything he created except one another.
That's right. Mhm.
They were never given dominion over one another. So that means man doesn't get to tell woman what to do. Woman doesn't have to think that she's the lesser vessel, or you were created from my rib, but I was created whole.
That's right.
So we have to teach the Genesis narrative properly, because what I say is that abuse strips one of their God-given dominion, one terrifying blow at a time. Start teaching women to embrace their dominion, their God-given dominion. You are not a second-class citizen in the eyes of God. You weren't an afterthought after God created everything else. He created man and woman in his image and in his likeness and gave them dominion. We have to teach it, and we have to teach it right.
Thank you. Amen.
That's right. Amen. Amen. Pastor Oprah play amen.
So you're next after that, Dr. Pepper. Good luck.
Well, I would say this is why I love her. He gave us dominion, and that the term in from a sociological perspective, that is now the new coined phrase, is equity access.
Yes.
That phrase has now taken over. It's big in the United States. I don't know if it is a phrase that is popular for grant writing and all sorts of things in Australia and in Africa, but I'm sure you have experienced or seen the form of it.
Yes.
So equity access is the dominant phrase, where we are encouraged as educators and social workers and counselors to basically inculcate in our programs. We're trying to teach it. That has biblical roots in Genesis 1,
Yes.
where God gave us dominion, while we each have our own indigenous roles.
Yes.
And there is nothing wrong with having the man be the head from a biblical perspective, whereby that means to be a cover, not a controller.
Correct.
Where the woman was created after everything was placed in the garden. The man is the toiler, right? That doesn't mean that I don't have equity access.
Right.
And at the same time be given the opportunity to embrace all of my femininity.
Right.
I don't have to become masculine
Right.
to demand my equity access. It is a right that was given to me by God. Man's law stripped me of it.
Correct.
And the teaching of societal roles has created a construct that has caused me to now feel that I must roll and operate in this vein. And I don't deserve, neither do I really need to have equity access, which leaves us far more vulnerable to victimization on a more chronic scale than men. That is not to say that men don't become victims themselves, but it is most often the woman.
Yes.
And so subsequently, we need to deal with, as April has said, that construct of the biblical teaching and how it looks in everyday society. And we have to undo, well, because I need to ask you, because you are a man, what this is,
Right.
or what that is.
Right.
Not because he's a man, but because he has more experience in doing this. I get it. We both get it. Being women in the gospel, we are leaders in our craft. We both have doctorates in ministry. We know what we are doing when we are in the pulpit. We are skillful. Yet we have been in scenarios where we've been asked to preach from the floor.
Yes.
Simply because of our gender.
Yes.
And the word of God that we could project would outperform many men. But it couldn't even be received simply because of our gender. And then all types of scriptures are used to try to undefine who we are, or to cause us to have to explain our pedigree with far more depth than any other male member of the ecclesia would ever have to encounter, leaving us now victims of a culture of spiritual abuse that God never intended, because it's not in the Bible.
Correct.
And so now I want to say in closing, I would encourage women, particularly women, but really all people. If you're in oppressed churches by male dominated leaders who's oppressing you, get out. God has now raised up ministries that may be female led, but that may be the very place that has the answer to your freedom,
Correct.
that will allow you to now not only learn about freedom, but to express your talent, express your God-given gift. We are here to be guiding lights in the middle of darkness. Being a guiding light, being the authority in our churches does not make us God.
Correct.
And where the Bible stops, we have to be silent. So we have been given spiritual authority to help people make decisions and to govern from an administrative perspective for the sake of order, but not for the sake of enslaving people, controlling people. And so even when it comes to victims, they even have the choice to remain victimized or to get free. The choice is yours. Prayer is powerful. Prayer changes things, but it works with faith. And faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. The word of God must be taught in a way that God intended it, that provides us with the freedom, which is enmeshed in equity access, which is not oppressive, but does give us spiritual boundaries to exist in a way that Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And so I would encourage all of your listeners to rethink how we view these scriptures, what it means. Is it our teaching that is stuck in a social construct, or is it true biblical principle? And those are the questions that I think need to continue to be asked and posed, because a lot of the things that we are saying God said and did has nothing to do with him. It has to do with the social construct, not the biblical principle.
Amen to this as well. It's just so I'm not going to add anything. I hope and I know that a lot of of the people in the audience really enjoyed it, and had the opportunity to really voice, because I think a lot of the women here have actually been in abusive relationship, of I've seen it in their life, in their environment. So it's good to have them really expressing themselves, and also getting to to interact with experts like yourself, and who actually have the experience as well, and also have the knowledge to guide to guide us, and to guide the audience to be able to handle and make a difference as well, to make sure that we start to see those numbers go down, because it's becoming really dramatic. So let's have a last round, our last round before we close out. There's Princess Years. I was one of those women that thought that I will stay in this abusive relationship for the sake of my children. But let me tell you, my children were the ones who stood up after 6 years and said, if you think you were in this dysfunctional relationship for us, you have no idea of the damage it had caused. And that was the day when I filed for divorce. So yeah, you are damaging your children as well by exposing them to abuse, and so you're not actually helping. And so, Princess, again, it started in school with those little boys slapping little girls and getting away with it, and later becomes really dangerous. And yes, if we have boys, we have to make sure as women that we get to educate them the right way about abuse, and really make sure that they don't use it as a way to communicate with any woman. So that's very important. And Charmaine, thank you, because I didn't know that gaslighting was abuse. Thank you. So that's and we have many more, but obviously just mean that I have to bring you back at some point, because there's still a lot to be said about this. And I really thank you so much for your time and for all your.
Marielle, I just wanted to say specifically, since Charmaine said this, and the person Princess, I lived it, and I had to get out of the relationship. I wrote a book called I'm Married, but I Feel Like I'm Single. Overcome 5 Steps to Navigating Through a Successful Divorce. It's available on Amazon, but I would encourage your viewers to get it because it's my life. I changed some of the names for the sake of, for the sake of peace, but it's very authentic, and it's the steps I had to go through as a spiritual leader. Going through the divorce was was difficult in their eyes. It was the emotional trauma that I internalized, being in a position of empowerment, which caused me every day I lived in conflict. And so I know I'm not the only one. From the comments that I'm hearing, I'm certain that regardless of where you are in the relationship spectrum, that book will bless you, because I wrote it while I was in the journey and finished it after I got healed. I'm
So
married,
that's.
but I feel like I'm single.
So, I mean, just because before we leave, I almost forgot, is how do people connect with you? Because I've seen few comments here where they really want to continue this conversation, with you and connect with you. So, how do they connect with you and get the opportunity to continue this very deep conversation?
Well, they can connect with me via Facebook. They can inbox me later on this month. This is August. Later on this month, I'll be taking pre-orders for the book Behind the Veil, Domestic Abuse in Christian Homes. So it'll be ready for release in September. And then in September, I'll be launching some small group peer mentoring sessions for women. They're going to be small. And when I say small group, I mean small, because I want to keep them small and intimate. So there'll be a set and a B set, and I don't want it over 12 to 14 women. I want to keep it small, but it'll be peer mentoring, and it'll be a safe space for women to gather, for women to grow, and for women to unpack some of the things that have been happening to them in their lives so that they can move toward where God wants them to be. But you can connect with me right now on Facebook and inbox me if anyone has any questions, or if they'd like to talk some more about some things that they've been dealing with.
Okay, Dr. Pepper, anything else? Where can they connect with you, and anything coming up on your side?
Yes, they can follow me on Facebook as well, Instagram and Twitter, Dr. Pepper Bonet Martin, Dr. Pepper Martin, or Pepper Bonet Martin. They can Google me. If they want to connect with me directly, I do have, they can contact info at dhcc.church or pjb@dhcc.church. They
Okay,
can
all
also
right.
call 877-698-3422, extension 2, and that's 877-698-DHCC, extension 2.
Thank you very much. I'll probably follow up as well in the comment to put all of this so that they have it in writing, and then they'll be able to follow up with you. And thanks a lot for being part of this and really helping to really tackle this, and I call, for me, it's the pandemic. That's the real pandemic, really, right now. Is really, we have to address it. We have to find a way to help, women and the men that are being abused. and stop those cycle of violence going on, because it's just not sustainable at all. So thank you very much for everybody who've been here following us, and being active in taking part in the conversation. It's been an amazing show, and for those who are going to watch the replay, you can do so on my YouTube channel, or just by on Facebook. I'm going to have the video on my personal page and also on my fan page. So it's been amazing, and I thank you, ladies, and God bless you, and may God bless the audience as well. And so I'm going to come back tomorrow for another show. And this time I'm going to have a guest from India. So thank you, and have a great day. And for me, it's going to be a good night. And I really, really enjoy the show. And like I said, we're going to have a part 2, because I see that, there's a need, and a lot of the women really need to have, this platform and express themselves and get, the knowledge from experts. So thank you very
Mariel,
much
for having us both. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
And hopefully next time we can get Dr. Celina, because we've missed her as well. So not a problem. So you take care, and have a great day.
Have a good night.